What if your entire life, every joy, every heartbreak, every impossible choice was part of a test you never signed up for? Not a metaphor, not a philosophical thought experiment, a real deliberate test. One that started the moment you arrived on this planet. A test with no clear rules, no visible examiners, and no obvious grading system. It sounds like science fiction, or maybe something whispered about in ancient texts, but the more you think about it, the more it starts to make a strange kind of sense. Why is the Earth so perfectly suited for life? Why do certain events feel too precise to be coincidence? And why do so many cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, keep returning to the same idea that life is not just something you live, but something you're measured by? Start looking around and the details get suspicious. Earth spins at the perfect speed. It orbits at the perfect distance from the sun. Its moon is unusually large. Its seasons, magnetic field, atmosphere, all bizarrely fine-tuned for life to not only survive, but evolve, build, and wonder. And with all that perfection comes challenge, disease, disasters, loss, conflict. Everything you'd need if you were trying to push a species to grow, to adapt, to reveal its true nature. Now imagine someone or something is watching, not in a cinematic way, with cameras and spotlights, but quietly, from a distance, collecting data, not interfering, just observing how you behave under pressure, when no one's looking, when things don't go your way. Because that's when the real test happens, when you struggle, when you choose between selfishness and compassion, between fear and courage, between giving up and pushing forward. You've probably felt it before, even if you didn't have the words for it. Moments that feel too meaningful, paths that open exactly when they need to, setbacks that seem almost designed. This isn't about conspiracy, it's about perspective, because once you start entertaining the idea, just entertaining it, that maybe this isn't just a life, but a test, something changes. You start looking at every moment differently, and maybe, just maybe, that shift in perception is the very first question on the exam. If Earth were truly a test, the first place you'd have to look is the setup, the stage, the conditions we've all been placed into without consent or instruction. And when you take a closer look at that stage, the planet itself, it begins to feel almost suspicious in its precision, as if someone or something went through a checklist of what life would need to flourish, and then added just enough difficulty to make sure it wouldn't be too easy. We tend to think of Earth as our home, a natural outcome of cosmic randomness, the lucky result of swirling dust, heat, and time. But that explanation starts to wobble the deeper you go, because for all the randomness the universe seems to offer, Earth feels strangely curated. Let's start with the obvious. Our planet orbits in what scientists call the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. If we were slightly closer to the sun, the oceans would boil away, the atmosphere would collapse, and life as we know it would never have stood a chance. A little farther, and the world would be locked in a permanent, deep freeze, a barren rock covered in ice. But here we are, exactly where we need to be, with sunlight that's warm but not lethal, heat that drives weather and growth but doesn't burn everything to ash. Is that luck? Maybe. Or maybe it's the first setting in a test designed to give the illusion of randomness while providing just enough balance to make the experiment interesting. Then there's the tilt. Earth spins at an angle, roughly 23.5 degrees, and because of that, we have seasons. Not too extreme in most parts of the world, but not static either. Seasons force change. They encourage planning, migration, harvesting, shelter building, and adaptation. A world without seasons might be easier in some ways, but it would also be stagnant, less challenge, fewer opportunities for growth. From a testing perspective, a planetary tilt is the perfect variable. It doesn't destroy, it pressures, it pushes, and what's a test without pressure? The moon is another anomaly. It's unusually large for a planet of Earth's size, and it's positioned just far enough to produce tides, gentle enough to move the oceans without drowning the land. Those tides stir nutrients, regulate marine ecosystems, and may have been essential for the early development of life. But it does more than just tug at the water. The moon stabilizes Earth's rotation. Without it, our axis would wobble chaotically, turning the climate into a nightmare of unpredictability. Imagine trying to build a civilization when the sun could rise in the north one year and in the west the next. The moon prevents that chaos. It creates long-term stability while still allowing for daily and seasonal variation. Again, it's just enough of a challenge to make things interesting, without making them impossible. The atmosphere is next. A fragile skin of gases just thick enough to trap heat, block radiation, and let us breathe. Any thinner, and the sun's rays would cook the surface. Any thicker, and we'd choke or burn in a runaway greenhouse effect. It's made mostly of nitrogen and oxygen, in proportions that are ideal for complex life. A little more oxygen and fire would be uncontrollable. A little less, and our cells wouldn't function. This balance is so precise that it almost dares you to call it coincidence. One slight tweak, and the whole system collapses. But here it is, working quietly in the background, invisible but essential, a perfect condition for life, and for watching how life behaves when it thinks it's alone. And what about the magnetic field? Generated by Earth's molten core, it shields us from deadly solar winds and cosmic radiation. Without it, those winds would gradually strip away the atmosphere, just like they did on Mars. That's right, Mars, which might once have had oceans and air, lost it all when its magnetic field died. No field, no shield, no test. But Earth still has one, pulsing silently, guarding us while we go about our lives unaware. If someone wanted this planet to run a long, complex test over billions of years, a magnetic field would be a basic requirement. You'd need to keep the lab sealed until the data collection was complete. Then there's water. Earth is the only known place in the universe where water exists naturally in all three states: solid, liquid, and gas. That's not just convenient, it's miraculous. The water cycle keeps climate stable, moves energy across the planet, and supports life in countless forms. It's one of the few substances that expands when it freezes, which means ice floats, insulating lakes and oceans from freezing solid. Without that quirk of physics, many aquatic life forms would die off every winter. But that's not what happened. Instead, we get a liquid world where storms, rivers, and clouds shape the environment, create ecosystems, and test life in endless variations. Water is everywhere, but never still, always moving, always shaping, always changing. The ideal condition for testing how life evolves under dynamic pressure. Now look at the geology. Earth's crust is broken into tectonic plates, and those plates float on molten rock, constantly moving, colliding, and pulling apart. This movement causes earthquakes, volcanoes, and the shifting of continents. That might sound like chaos, but it's also how we get mountains, fertile valleys, new land. Volcanic eruptions release essential gases into the atmosphere. Earthquakes reshape coastlines and create new ecosystems. This isn't destruction for the sake of destruction, it's dynamic renewal, the kind of process you'd build into a system if you wanted to see how life adapts to both trauma and opportunity. Even danger, when you think about it, starts to look curated. Hurricanes, droughts, fires, floods. They're devastating, but they also spark resilience, innovation, and change. Entire cities have rebuilt stronger after disasters. Technologies have been developed in response to catastrophe. Societies that face hardship often come out more united, more resourceful, and that's the paradox of challenge. It breaks, but it also builds. If you were designing a long-term test of intelligent, emotional, adaptable beings, wouldn't you want to see how they react to tragedy? Wouldn't that be one of your most valuable data points? Zoom out, and the solar system itself starts to feel arranged. Jupiter, the largest planet, acts as a cosmic shield, its immense gravity pulling in or deflecting comets and asteroids that might otherwise slam into Earth. It's like a giant security guard standing at the edge of the solar system. We've even seen it happen. Massive impacts absorbed by Jupiter's atmosphere while Earth continues undisturbed. It's not a guarantee of safety, but it's a filter, a mitigation system, one that allows the test to continue longer, more steadily, without premature extinction events. And when you start adding all of this up, not just one perfect condition, but dozens, even hundreds, the word coincidence starts to lose its meaning. This isn't just a lucky throw of the cosmic dice, it's a full house. Again and again and again, every major feature of the planet seems to contribute to one central possibility: the development and endurance of complex life. But not too easily. never comfortably, always with just enough risk to keep the stakes high, just enough unpredictability to keep the results honest. If Earth is a test, then the environment has been rigged to demand effort, ingenuity, and adaptation. The goal doesn't seem to be survival alone. Plenty of species can survive. The goal might be what life becomes when given the tools to build something more, and the obstacles to make that building meaningful. You're not being handed paradise, you're being handed potential, and the instruction, they're hidden in plain sight in the weather, the oceans, the forests, the deserts, the disasters. Earth isn't just a backdrop for life. It's the variable, rich arena that sees what happens when sentient life is left to figure it all out on its own. And if this world is that finely tuned, then you have to wonder what else was set up without us noticing. Because if the planet is the stage, then everything that plays out on it might be part of the script, or maybe more unsettlingly, the script is being written by the choices we make when we think no one's watching. Once the idea takes root, that Earth might be more than just a home, that it could actually be a test, something subtle but profound begins to shift in your mind. You start to feel it in the background of your daily life, like a strange gravity pulling at your thoughts. A single question echoes louder than the rest. What if this is all on purpose? It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it just lingers, quietly, persistently, and the moment you start taking it seriously, even just as a thought experiment, you can never fully unsee it. The question itself begins to reshape everything. It begins simply. You walk down the same street you've walked 100 times, but now you're noticing things. Noticing how people interact, how nature weaves in and out of concrete, how moments seem to line up just a little too perfectly sometimes, like a friend calling the moment you were about to break down, like finding the right words when you didn't think you had any left, like narrowly avoiding something terrible because you hesitated for half a second. Before, you'd have called it luck. Now you start to wonder if it's something else. A nudge, a variable, a reminder. Because if Earth is a test, it's not just the setting that's curated, it's the experience. And that changes how you see every part of it. The traffic jam that makes you late isn't just an inconvenience, it's a scenario. The betrayal that crushed you wasn't just bad luck, it was a moral fork in the road. The unexpected kindness from a stranger when you were at your lowest wasn't just chance, it was part of something bigger, a test within the test. The pieces you thought were random start to form a pattern. Not always one you can read clearly, but one you can't ignore either. And as the question grows, it leads to other questions. If Earth is a test, who designed it? And what are they looking for? Is this about how we survive, or how we treat each other while surviving? Are we meant to become something greater, or is the act of becoming the point? And perhaps the hardest question of all, are we supposed to know we're being tested? Because awareness changes everything. It's one thing to live your life, stumbling through challenges, learning by trial and error. It's another to live under the suspicion that every choice matters in ways you can't see, that your story is part of a massive invisible equation being evaluated in real time. The idea becomes even more chilling when you consider how subtle the test might be. There's no loud announcement, no visible rules, no countdown clock, just the steady unfolding of time and consequence. If you forget the idea, nothing seems different. But if you remember, even briefly, you start to see layers behind everything. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the very act of asking the question is part of the exam. Most people never do. They go through life accepting what is, reacting to whatever comes. And maybe that's fine. Maybe some participants are meant to remain unaware. But when you begin to suspect, when you start to notice the rules of your life subtly shift, decisions feel heavier, moments seem charged, and you start behaving differently, not because you're scared, but because you're aware. You start to examine your motives. Why did I say that? Was it to help, or to be seen helping? Why did I lie? What was I protecting? What does it mean that I stayed silent when I could have spoken up? These aren't just philosophical reflections, they become personal diagnostics, as if your own mind is now split in two, the part living your life and the part watching, taking notes. And maybe that watcher is you, or maybe it's something else entirely. Because if this is a test, it raises the idea of an observer, someone or something reviewing your answers, tracking your growth. And if they're watching, how detailed is their attention? Are they reading your thoughts or just watching your actions? Are they interested in your success or indifferent to your suffering? The uncertainty is maddening and fascinating. It makes you re-examine every time you chose decency over convenience or selfishness over integrity. It reframes the idea of consequence, not as cosmic punishment, but as feedback. Every moment becomes both your life and your lesson. What's more unsettling is realizing how well-designed the test seems to be, if that's truly what this is. Not because it's fair, but because it's effective. It gives you just enough information to operate food, shelter, language, emotion, but not enough to ever feel truly safe. It gives you love, then loss, strength, then weakness, achievement, then failure. It doesn't feel like chaos, it feels calibrated, as if the difficulty level was set to expose your character, not to comfort you. And the test doesn't stop when you're overwhelmed. It keeps going, which in a way is its own kind of question. What do you do when you're overwhelmed? You also begin to wonder if you're being tested alone. Are we all in our own separate experiments? Or is this collective? Maybe it's not about individual performance at all. Maybe the test is about humanity itself, about whether we can evolve past division, past tribalism, past destruction. Maybe it's about whether a species can survive its own intelligence long enough to develop compassion, balance, and wisdom. From that angle, your choices still matter, not because of how they affect you, but because of how they ripple outward. One act of kindness spreads, one act of cruelty does too. And in the test, both are measured, not just by what they do, but by what they inspire in others. This idea opens up an even deeper possibility, that there isn't one test, but many, that every person is in a unique trial, with challenges designed specifically for them. Your fears, your temptations, your struggles, they're not generic, they're custom, because what's hard for you might be easy for someone else, and what breaks you might strengthen another. So if the test is real, it's not uniform, it's tailored. That would explain why fairness feels so elusive, why some are born into privilege and others into pain, why life sometimes feels impossibly weighted in favor of some and crushing to others. From the outside, that looks unjust, but from inside a test designed to measure resilience, empathy, and evolution, it might be exactly the point. But this idea isn't new. In fact, it's ancient. Civilizations long before ours told stories of trials and judgment, of gods who watched and recorded, of deeds weighed and souls tested. They spoke of karma, of heaven and hell, of rebirth and reckoning. And maybe they weren't just creating metaphors, maybe they were interpreting echoes, faint signals of a structure they could feel, but not fully explain. Maybe their myths were guesses at a truth that we're still circling thousands of years later. Because even now, in the age of science and data, we still talk about purpose. We still crave meaning, and the idea that life might be more than survival, that it might matter, is a feeling we can't seem to And maybe that's what the test is really measuring. Not just what we do, but what we choose to believe. When everything feels random, do you search for meaning anyway? When life is hard, do you still reach for kindness? When the world seems indifferent, do you create beauty just because you can? These aren't questions with obvious answers, but maybe obvious answers aren't the point. Maybe the whole test is about how you navigate uncertainty, how you behave when you don't know the rules, how you choose to live when no one gives you the script. And so the question, what if Earth is a test, doesn't go away. It doesn't need to. Its power isn't in the conclusion, it's in how it opens your eyes. Because the moment you start asking it, you stop sleepwalking. You start noticing. You begin to wonder not just what this life is, but what it's for. And maybe, just maybe, that curiosity is the first sign that you're finally taking the test seriously. If the conditions of Earth are the stage, and the strange precision of life's unfolding is the script, then section 3 of this unfolding idea asks something deeper. What exactly is being tested? What are the metrics? What qualities are being observed? It's easy to imagine that survival is part of it. After all, every species is shaped by natural selection. But if you look closer at humans, especially, it seems like something more nuanced is under observation. Something more abstract, more personal. Because while other animals adapt, evolve, and survive, humans do something more. They reflect. We feel, We choose in ways that often go against instinct. That in itself suggests a different kind of trial, one that doesn't just measure capability, but character. Start with the emotional spectrum. No other species seems to process grief the way we do. No other species writes poetry about loss or builds monuments to memory. We love and then mourn in a way that suggests we know what we had, that we understand the weight of absence. And while pain might seem like a cruel feature in a test, it also reveals something profound. We are willing to care, even when it hurts. That alone sets us apart, because if the point was simply survival, evolution would have selected away such fragility. Instead, it kept it, maybe even enhanced it. That says something. It hints that the test isn't just about enduring the world, but about responding to it, feeling it deeply and choosing what kind of person you become in the aftermath. Kindness is another outlier. In nature, kindness often doesn't make evolutionary sense. It burns calories, expends energy, and offers no guarantee of return. Yet humans do it constantly. We give money to strangers we'll never meet. We rescue animals in distress. We create charities and non-profits and relief efforts with no personal reward. Why? Some say it's social programming. Others point to empathy as a biological tool. But what if it's more? What if kindness is one of the core metrics of this test? Not just kindness that's easy, like smiling at a friend, but kindness that's inconvenient. That costs you something. That forces you to choose someone else's comfort over your own. That's when the test seems to sharpen. That's when it watches closely, because in those moments, you reveal what kind of soul you carry. Then there's honesty, integrity. These invisible traits don't get you ahead in any obvious way. In fact, being honest often complicates things. It risks judgment, backlash, rejection. So why do we value it so deeply? Why does truth feel right even when it's painful? Why do lies, even small ones, sit heavy on the chest? Maybe because truth isn't just a social construct. Maybe it's another parameter in this unseen exam. Maybe it's a thread that runs through every moral choice, and those who protect it, even when it's dangerous, are answering a question most people don't even hear being asked. And what about courage? Not just physical bravery, like running into a burning building, but emotional courage. The ability to be vulnerable, to admit fault, to confront your own flaws. That kind of courage is quiet. It doesn't earn medals or applause, but it changes everything. It allows growth. It opens the door to forgiveness, both given and received. If Earth is a test, then vulnerability is a hard question. The question most people skip because it's uncomfortable. But those who face it tend to transform. And maybe transformation is one of the highest scores you can earn. The test seems to escalate, too. Think about how life operates. Every time you pass a difficult phase, another appears. Just when you think you've figured it out, a new challenge shows up, a new kind of pain, a deeper level of responsibility. It's like the test adapts to your progress, not to punish you, but to see if your growth is real. It's not enough to be strong once you have to choose strength again and again. Not enough to love once you have to love even after betrayal. And not enough to forgive once you have to keep forgiving, even when it feels undeserved. The test doesn't care about isolated moments. It cares about patterns, who you consistently choose to be, even when you're tired, even when no one would blame you for quitting. Another fascinating element is isolation. Humans are social creatures, but nearly every one of us experiences loneliness. Sometimes it comes suddenly, through loss or separation. Other times it's slow, creeping in despite crowds and conversations. Why would a test designed to develop empathy include isolation? Maybe because isolation strips away performance. It forces you to confront yourself without the noise of approval or distraction. You see your fears, your regrets, your self-image cracked or inflated. And then you're faced with the test's most brutal question: who are you when no one is watching? Because anyone can act noble under the spotlight. The real measure is who you are in the dark. Jealousy, ego, pride, these too seem to be part of the test. Not because they're flaws to be eliminated, but because they're mirrors. They show you where you feel small, where you seek validation, where you fear irrelevance. And once you see them clearly, the next question arises: what will you do about it? Will you let them rule you? Or will you face them, admit them, and work to grow past them? Again, it's not about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself and choosing to evolve when no one demands it. And then there's failure. In most games or systems, failure ends the attempt. Not here. On Earth, failure is almost required. You will lose. You will fall short. You will mess up, hurt others, make decisions you regret. That's not a flaw in the design. It's the design itself, because failure reveals resilience. It forces humility, and it raises a critical question. Do you learn, or do you give up? The test isn't about never falling. It's about what you do after you fall. How long it takes you to stand back up. What you carry with you when you rise. You might begin to notice that the hardest parts of life, the grief, the guilt, the confusion, are also the ones that offer the most growth. That's not a coincidence. That's structure. Design difficulty, not to break you, but to reveal you. You don't get to choose the questions. You only get to choose your answers. And that's the most sobering realization. You're always answering whether you know it or not. Even boredom plays a role. In a world of constant stimulation, boredom forces you to confront silence, to create meaning from nothing. It tests whether you can sit with your thoughts or whether you'll distract yourself into oblivion. And in those empty spaces, the real questions often surface. What do I want? Who am I really? What am I doing with the time I've been given? The test doesn't always reward clarity. Often, the more aware you become, the harder things get. The illusion of safety fades. You start to see how much is out of your control, but you also begin to recognize what is within your grasp. How you speak, how you love, how you respond. You realize that the scoreboard isn't external. It's not about wealth, status, or applause. It's internal, quiet. It's who you become in the process of living. And if this is a test, then it's not timed in minutes or years. It's timed in moments. Moments of choice. Moments of truth. Not the big flashy ones, but the small, invisible ones. Do you hold the door open? Do you answer the message? Do you say I'm sorry even when your pride resists? These are the questions you answer every day. The test isn't waiting. It's already happening. It never stops. And here's the twist. Maybe the test isn't about passing or failing. Maybe it's about becoming. About peeling away every layer that's been built by fear, by expectation, by trauma, and uncovering what's real underneath. Maybe the real score is how close you come to your most honest, most compassionate, most courageous self. Not perfection, just truth. Maybe the test is simply asking over and over, will you become who you really are? And maybe your life, every heartbreak, every triumph, every silent decision is your answer. If you've made it this far into the idea that Earth might be a test, that our lives might be structured with intent rather than chaos, then the next question arises naturally and unavoidably. Who's running the test? Who or what is behind this careful orchestration of challenge, pain, love, coincidence, beauty, and consequence? And more importantly, why? Why would such a test exist at all? At first glance, the possibilities seem overwhelming. Some will default to the traditional religious perspective, a divine being, a creator, a God with a plan and a purpose, using Earth as a proving ground for souls. Others will lean into simulation theory. Perhaps we're part of an advanced civilization's experiment, a high-tech scenario unfolding within a supercomputer. Then there are those who look to extraterrestrial intelligence, advanced beings who seeded the planet with life and are now watching to see what unfolds. And of course, there's always the possibility that it's us, humans in the future, using quantum technologies or time loops to simulate the past and observe it from beyond. But regardless of which theory feels most compelling or least uncomfortable, what matters more than who is running the test is what the nature of the test reveals about its designer. Because any test reflects the values of the one who created it, and Earth's test, if that's what this is, speaks volumes through its structure. Start with the obvious. This is not a test of obedience. No clear instructions were given. No manual was distributed at birth. There are no obvious signs of constant surveillance. No clear punishments handed out for breaking universal laws. In fact, the test is subtle, almost hidden. That alone tells us something. It suggests that the observer, the architect, values free will. That choice, especially when made without certainty or reward, carries weight. That how we behave when we don't know if anyone's watching says more than how we behave when we do. That's a strange and powerful idea. It flips the usual narrative. Instead of an authority figure demanding loyalty, we might be dealing with something or someone who wants to see what we do with true freedom. Do we descend into selfishness, or do we reach for meaning, morality, and connection despite having every excuse not to? If that's what the test is about, then the test giver isn't looking for blind followers. They're looking for something else: authenticity. Maybe even integrity in the truest, purest sense. Now consider the design, the complexity of the human condition. We are given consciousness, but not answers, intelligence, but also confusion. We're capable of beauty, creation, and love, but also of violence, deceit, and apathy. This isn't accidental. If the purpose was to ensure good behavior, we'd be built differently. Simpler, more binary. But we're not. We're contradictions wrapped in skin. That points to a test not of success or failure, but of depth. Perhaps the observer doesn't care what job you hold, what country you were born in, or how flawless your life appears on paper. Maybe what they care about is your internal journey, how much of yourself you've explored, challenged, and evolved. It also explains the pain. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Suffering seems to be a universal constant. Everyone goes through it. Not just once, but repeatedly. Loss, illness, betrayal, fear. No one escapes it. That doesn't feel random. In a test scenario, pain functions like pressure in a lab experiment. It reveals reactions. Some crumble, some grow stronger. Most do both, at different times. And the observer isn't judging the pain itself, but how it changes you. Do you become bitter? Do you become wise? Do you close off? Or do you open up? Pain in this test might be the most valuable data point. Then there's the uncanny timing. You felt it. Those moments when things line up too perfectly. When you meet someone who changes everything, seemingly by chance. When a book, a video, or a song appears right when you need it. When a disaster strikes and then somehow leads to a revelation you never would have had otherwise. Coincidence? Maybe. But if Earth is a test, then those moments might be deliberate variables, planted to see how you respond. You're given clues, nudges, chances to change direction. Whether or not you recognize them could be part of the examination. There's also the presence of duality. Every virtue has its shadow. Courage can become recklessness. Love can become obsession. Intelligence can become manipulation. It's as if every trait is part of a double-edged sword. And maybe that is the test, learning how to balance. To use your tools wisely, knowing they can both build and destroy, that's not something a simple test would require. That's the kind of question you only ask if you're trying to measure wisdom, something deeper than intelligence, something rooted in humility and understanding. Think about forgiveness. It doesn't make logical sense, really. Why should someone who hurt you benefit from your mercy? Why should you carry the burden of letting go when you weren't the one who caused the harm? And yet, over and over, life presents us with the chance to forgive, not just others, but ourselves. It's as if the observer is asking, can you transcend instinct? Can you move past the simple math of offense and retribution, and instead embrace something higher? Forgiveness in this model becomes a master-level question, difficult, optional, but deeply revealing. All of this points to a test, not rooted in power or punishment, but in development. You aren't being tested to be controlled. You're being tested to be understood, and maybe, just maybe, to be trusted with something greater. Because if the observer is watching to see what we do with pain, love, freedom, and choice, it stands to reason that those qualities matter beyond this life. That Earth is not the end, but the beginning, the prelude, and that this world is the training ground for something else. Something where your choices here determine your capacity there. That might sound spiritual, but it doesn't have to be. Even the most rational thinker can admit, if this is all there is, if life is just a random spark in a meaningless universe, then why does it feel so heavy? Why do we care so much? Why do we cry at beauty? Why does injustice hurt more than it should? Why do we instinctively believe that some things are just wrong, even when no one taught us that? These feelings don't fit in a cold, mechanical model. but they make perfect sense in a test. A test that isn't just watching you, but inviting you to grow. You might also begin to see that the test isn't just for individuals, it's collective. Humanity as a whole seems to be tested over and over on greed, compassion, power, unity. We repeat the same patterns. Empires rise and fall, wars erupt and subside, breakthroughs emerge from breakdowns, and every time the same questions return. Will we choose empathy over division? Will we prioritize truth over comfort? Will we learn from history or let it loop endlessly? Maybe the observer is watching the species evolve, not just the soul. Maybe Earth is a classroom for civilization. But here's the twist. What if the test isn't about them at all? Whoever they are. What if the test was designed for you to become your own observer? Maybe the real purpose is to train your inner witness, to teach you to ask hard questions, to see beyond ego, to separate your emotions from your principles, and to realize that in the end, you are the one grading your life. You are the one deciding if you lived with courage, with curiosity, with love. And if you didn't, if you fell short, it was never about shame. It was about learning, about recognizing, and choosing differently next time. That might be the most beautiful part of this theory, that the test, while challenging, is not cruel. It's not here to break you. It's here to refine you. Like fire refines gold, like friction sharpens blades, like storms prune dead branches to let new ones grow. If Earth is a test, it's one built on opportunity, not punishment. You fall so you can learn how to rise. You lose so you can learn what truly matters. You hurt so you can choose whether to pass that pain forward or stop it in its tracks. And maybe, just maybe, the test ends not when you've mastered everything, but when you've finally realized that you're ready to begin something greater. That your life wasn't about collecting answers, but about becoming the kind of soul who dares to ask better questions. That's when the real learning begins. And that's when perhaps you hear the silence break, and someone, somewhere, smiles and checks off a box that simply says, awaken. If Earth is a test, then Section 5 leads us into perhaps the most mysterious and unnerving part of the idea. What happens after the test ends? What comes after life, if anything at all? If this existence is structured like an examination of our values, choices, and growth, then surely it's not just for show. No test is created without a result in mind, a purpose that stretches beyond the final question. But this opens the door to everything we don't want to confront: death, legacy, the unknown, and the possibility that we're not just living but becoming something more. Let's start with the one truth we all share, yet rarely speak about in depth. We all die. Every person, no matter how powerful, wise, or kind, faces the same eventual silence. And if you've ever sat with someone who was nearing the end of their life, you may have noticed something strange. It's not always fear that dominates those final days. Often it's reflection, a kind of slow-motion review of a life lived. People don't talk about money or fame. They talk about relationships, about regret, about forgiveness, about love. The very things we've already identified as the core metrics of this test. That alone should make us pause. When the final curtain approaches, what matters most are the questions that seem invisible in everyday life, but essential in a cosmic one. Some people report what's often referred to as a life review during near-death experiences. Not a vague flash, but a vivid, emotionally immersive reliving of past moments. Interestingly, these moments aren't always the big events, like graduation or weddings. They're often small. How you treated someone in passing, what you said during an argument, whether you chose kindness when no one was watching. In some accounts, people describe feeling what the other person felt in those moments. If that's even partly true, then the test may not be about how grand your actions were, but how much empathy you lived with. Imagine that. Imagine reliving every moment of impact, not from your view, but from theirs. That's not judgment, that's understanding, that's learning on the deepest level possible. But maybe you don't believe in the soul. Maybe you think consciousness ends when the body shuts down. Fair. Let's go there. Even if death is a hard stop, the test could still have meaning, because what you leave behind, the ripples of your actions continue, your words, your love, your cruelty, your choices. They echo into other people's lives, shaping how they behave, how they love, how they treat others. That's a legacy. That's a form of immortality. You might die, but your decisions don't. And if Earth is a test, Maybe the purpose is to become aware of that ripple effect before it's too late. To take responsibility for the energy you spread, because it doesn't vanish, it becomes someone else's starting point. And what if the test is not linear? What if instead of a single pass or fail, it's a loop, a cycle of experience meant to refine you over time, through lifetimes? Reincarnation is one of the oldest spiritual beliefs, spanning cultures and continents, and while it's impossible to prove with science, it has eerie consistency. Children recalling details of past lives, déjà vu that feels more like a memory than confusion, talents and fears that appear without explanation. If the test extends beyond one life, then your challenges aren't punishments, they're curriculum, lessons you didn't finish the first time. And that means nothing is wasted. No pain, no failure, no heartbreak is ever pointless. It's all part of your soul's education. Now, imagine that after this test, this life, you graduate. Not in the cap and gown sense, but in a cosmic one. You move on to something greater, something where the stakes are higher, the challenges more complex, but the clarity more profound. Maybe you become a guide, helping others through their tests. Maybe you enter a new kind of existence entirely, one that requires the kind of wisdom and compassion that can only be earned by facing Earth's chaos with grace. If Earth is the proving ground, then what lies beyond it might be the assignment you've been preparing for all along. Some believe that after death, the soul returns to a source, a kind of universal intelligence or divine consciousness. In that view, life is not a separation, but a temporary experience of division. You, as a soul, come here to forget what you are, so that your return carries weight. You come here to choose good without knowing why, to act with love, without any reward, because only in that blindness can true character be revealed. And when you return, when the test ends, you bring back more than just memories. You bring insight, a unique perspective that adds to the collective intelligence of the source. In this way, every individual life is like a single thread in a vast tapestry, essential not because it stands alone, but because it makes the picture whole. Now think about time. We live as though time is linear, because that's how we experience it. But in physics, time is far more fluid. Some theories suggest that all moments exist simultaneously, that the past, present, and future are layered, not stretched. If that's the case, then your test might not even be happening in isolation. Your growth might be influencing someone else's journey across time. Your compassion today might ripple backward or forward and give someone else the strength to choose differently. We don't know. But if Earth is a test, then time might not be a constraint. It might be part of the challenge, learning to choose well even when you believe your time is limited. And then there's love, not romantic love, but pure love, the kind that transcends logic and expectation. It appears at birth between mother and child. It appears in friendships that feel like fate, in sacrifice, in forgiveness, in moments when you hold someone's pain as your own. This kind of love is not efficient, it's not rational, it's divine. And if there is an afterlife, if there is a next level, then maybe love is the only currency that crosses the border. Maybe the test isn't graded in achievement or theology, but in how well you learn to love, not just others, yourself too. Because self-love, real self-love, is one of the hardest lessons of all, and many never pass that part of the exam. There's a phrase that lingers in ancient philosophy and mystical teachings: as above, so below. Meaning, what happens here is a reflection of something greater. Earth as a test fits perfectly into that idea. We mirror the higher world, even in our confusion. The structure of the test, the tension between free will and fate, love and fear, gain and loss, may be a shadow of something more majestic, more infinite. And once we finish the test, we may finally see the whole picture, all the threads, all the reasons, all the whys we asked in the dark. But maybe the afterlife isn't a place. Maybe it's a state of being. Maybe heaven isn't a realm in the clouds, but a frequency you reach by becoming aligned with truth, love, and wisdom. And maybe hell isn't a punishment, but a continuation of confusion, a place you linger when you refuse to grow. In that model, the test never ends in some grand judgment scene. It ends when you're ready, when you've evolved enough to move on. Until then, Earth remains your classroom, your battlefield, your mirror. And what if we're not alone? What if others who passed the test before us are watching, gently guiding, sending nudges we interpret as intuition or synchronicity? What if dreams, gut feelings, and chance encounters are the fingerprints of those who've already crossed over? It wouldn't be interference, just support. Like older students cheering on the next class, encouraging them to stay awake, stay kind, stay curious. So what happens when the test ends? No one knows for sure, but maybe that's part of the design, because if we knew the ending, we might try to cheat the test. We might fake the answers, but without knowing, we have to live it for real. We have to choose without certainty, and in doing so, we become authentic. We become earned. If Earth is a test, then the final and perhaps most important question isn't about science, metaphysics, or even what comes after. It's this: what kind of person are you becoming through the process? Because once the idea sinks in, that life is not random, that every challenge may be deliberate, that your behavior actually matters in a bigger sense, the spotlight shifts inward, not onto your circumstances, not onto your beliefs, but onto your choices. And in that spotlight, every mask burns away. You are left with your raw self, unpolished, unedited. Section 6 explores the ultimate expression of that reality, self-mastery. Because if Earth is a test, then it's not just testing your responses to external events, it's testing your internal evolution. Not whether you can avoid mistakes, but whether you can learn from them. Not whether you feel pain, but whether you let it define you. Not whether you fall, but how you rise. Most people move through life in a kind of autopilot, reacting rather than choosing, driven by habits, fears, wounds they haven't fully examined. But if this is truly a test, then awareness becomes your greatest asset. Self-awareness is the moment you realize that the test isn't happening to you, it's happening within you. That your anger, your envy, your anxiety, your pride, none of these are barriers to success in the test. They are the test. The point isn't to avoid them. The point is to face them, understand them, and ultimately rise above them. Consider the concept of ego. In nearly every philosophical and spiritual tradition, ego is presented as the false self, the voice in your head that wants to win, dominate, control, or be validated. Ego thrives on comparison, on fear of being less, on the illusion that you are separate from others, and yet, this ego isn't a mistake, it's a feature of the test. You were given it so that you could transcend it, so that you could learn how to identify it, wrestle with it, and ultimately quiet it, not through suppression, but through wisdom. Because when you finally catch yourself in the act, snapping at someone because you felt insecure, gossiping because it made you feel powerful, staying silent because you feared rejection, that moment of recognition is sacred. It means you're waking up. It means you're starting to realize that your inner world shapes your outer life. That's the real exam. Not whether you say the right thing when everyone is watching, but whether you think the right thing when no one is. This journey towards self-mastery isn't glamorous. It's uncomfortable. It requires brutal honesty. You'll have to admit that you've hurt people, that you've acted selfishly, that your pain has sometimes made you cruel. And that's hard, but it's also liberating. Because once you stop pretending to be perfect, you can finally start becoming whole. You'll begin to notice your triggers, the situations or people that set you off, and instead of blaming them, you'll start asking deeper questions. Why does this bother me so much? What wound is being touched here? What belief am I protecting? That's when growth begins. That's when you stop playing defense and start understanding the architecture of your own psyche. And it's not just about healing pain, it's about cultivating virtue. In a world obsessed with achievement, fame, and outward success, we rarely talk about virtues anymore. Things like humility, patience, courage, integrity, kindness. But in the framework of Earth as a test, these are the real currency. Because anyone can succeed when it's easy. Anyone can be kind when they're winning. The test is how you act when everything falls apart. When you're broke, betrayed, alone, afraid. That's when the real score is kept. And here's something most people miss. You're not just being tested in how you treat others. You're being tested in how you treat yourself. Do you speak to yourself with compassion? Do you forgive your mistakes? Or do you weaponize them? Do you believe in your ability to grow? Or have you secretly decided you're broken beyond repair? The voice you use with yourself is not private. it shapes you. If you tear yourself down, you walk into the world already wounded, and wounded people often wound others, intentionally or not. Self-love isn't indulgence, it's responsibility. Now look at how society functions. Everything around us encourages distraction, notifications, outrage, comparison, consumption. These aren't just byproducts of technology, they're part of the environment of the test. It's like trying to focus in a room filled with flashing lights and sirens. The point isn't to remove the chaos. The point is to learn how to stay centered despite it, to choose clarity over confusion, presence over performance, purpose over popularity. This is why practices like meditation, journaling, solitude, and reflection exist. Not to check spiritual boxes, but to train your awareness, to build the muscle of stillness. Because if you can remain grounded when the world is spinning, then you're no longer just reacting, you're directing. That's the shift from victim to creator, from pawn to player, from sleep to wakefulness. And here's a hard truth. You will be tested again and again on the same themes. If you struggle with abandonment, you'll encounter people who trigger it. If you fear failure, life will put you in positions where it's a possibility. If you crave control, you'll be thrown into chaos, not because the universe is cruel, but because the lesson hasn't been learned yet. The test repeats until you evolve, until you respond differently, until you stop seeing your wound as a scar and start seeing it as a compass. Self-mastery also means taking full responsibility, not for what happens to you, but for how you interpret it and respond. Blame is easy, growth is hard, but every time you choose ownership over excuses, you reclaim power. You stop waiting for the world to change and start becoming the change you needed, and eventually a strange transformation begins. You start caring less about being right and more about being at peace, less about looking good and more about doing good, less about winning and more about understanding. You become a presence, grounded, observant, kind. People feel it, they may not understand it, but they sense something different about you. You're no longer playing the same game, you've stepped outside the noise. At that point, you're no longer just surviving the test, you're mastering it, not perfectly, not without slips, but with awareness, with intention, and with increasing grace. You'll still feel pain, but you'll hold it differently. You'll still feel fear, but it won't paralyze you. You'll still face challenges, but you'll greet them like old teachers returning with new material. And maybe, just maybe, you start inspiring others. Not by preaching, but by being, by showing that it's possible to live with depth, presence, and integrity in a world that rewards the opposite. That alone could be your greatest contribution. Not some invention, not some performance, but your being, your clarity, your peace, your evolution. In the end, Earth as a test isn't about passing or failing. It's about waking up to your patterns, your power, your potential. It's about choosing the higher road, not because you have to, but because you can, because you understand now. You've seen the code. You're playing the long game. You're becoming who you were always meant to be, not by chasing it, but by remembering. And that's the final layer of self-mastery, the realization that the person you've been trying to become is who you were before the world told you to forget. The test wasn't to change you, it was to reveal you. And now that you've remembered, nothing, not even the chaos of Earth, can take that away. If Earth is a test, and if self-mastery is the path to navigating it consciously, then Section 7 opens a door to the deepest and most hidden truth of all. None of us are being tested alone. This part of the test is subtle, often ignored, but absolutely essential. Our connections to others, not just in the physical sense, like families, friends, or enemies, but in the energetic, emotional, even karmic ways that stretch beyond explanation. The idea that we are all isolated individuals is one of the most powerful illusions in the entire exam, and breaking that illusion may be one of its final and most important questions. Start by looking around you, not metaphorically, but literally. Every face you pass, every person in your life, even strangers you'll never meet again, they're all players in this shared experience. Each one is going through their own version of the same test, with different circumstances, different traumas, different challenges, but under the surface we're all navigating the same maze, with the same unseen instructions: grow, awaken, and the twist is, How we treat each other is part of the test, not a side note, but the heart of it. Let's take relationships, for example. They're often viewed as rewards or distractions, things we stumble into, things we hope will complete us, things that bring joy or suffering. But in the context of this cosmic test, they are more than that. They are assignments. Each person who enters your life, whether briefly or permanently, carries a purpose. Some are mirrors, showing you parts of yourself you've ignored. Some are teachers, arriving with lessons wrapped in pain. Others are allies, souls you've encountered before, here again to support your growth. And some are tests in themselves, challenges to your boundaries, your patience, your ability to forgive or walk away. Think of that person who broke your heart, betrayed your trust, or abandoned you when you needed them most. What if their role wasn't a mistake, but a deliberate part of the curriculum? What if the pain they caused wasn't random cruelty, but a tool for your evolution? In the moment it feels like injustice. But step back and you might see that the wound forced you to awaken, to heal something deeper, to recognize your worth. And that realization may have taken years. That's the thing about this part of the test. It's not graded instantly. It reveals itself in layers, slowly as your perspective shifts. And it's not just romantic or family relationships. Humanity as a whole is bound together by invisible threads. When a child is hurt on the other side of the world, and it stirs something in you that's not emotion, that's evidence. Evidence that your soul knows we are not truly separate. We are cells in the same body, sparks in the same fire, branches of the same tree. And ignoring that connection, treating others as less than, turning away from suffering, dehumanizing those who are different, is not just moral failure, it's failure of understanding. It's failing the interconnectedness portion of the test. And yet, society is built to challenge that understanding at every turn. We are taught to compete instead of collaborate, to compare instead of connect, to judge instead of empathize. That's part of the test too. Can you remember that others are on their own path, even when they're walking in the opposite direction? Can you honor someone's soul even when their actions hurt you? Can you see past the mask of someone's ego and recognize the struggling human underneath? Compassion then becomes one of the most powerful tools in this exam. Not pity, not passive kindness, but active compassion, choosing to see the humanity in others, even when it's inconvenient. Choosing to respond with empathy instead of defensiveness. Choosing to understand before you try to fix, change, or condemn. Because when you do that, something extraordinary happens. You create space for someone else to grow. You become a safe zone in the battlefield of life. And that might be the most sacred role of all. But let's not pretend this is easy. Some people are cruel. Some people lie, manipulate, or abuse. Are they part of the test too? Unfortunately, yes. And understanding that does not mean excusing their actions. It means recognizing that their behavior is a reflection of their level of consciousness, their own unhealed wounds, their stage in the journey. It means realizing that their test is different from yours. And sometimes passing your test means walking away from them, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. Because loving others does not mean allowing yourself to be broken. The test is about balance, knowing when to hold on and when to let go. And then there's the collective test, the one we face as a species. Climate crisis, injustice, corruption, war. These are not accidents. These are humanity's version of a pop quiz, showing us what we prioritize, how we respond to shared danger, whether we will choose greed or unity. And right now, our grade is incomplete. We're still learning, still stumbling, still forgetting that we rise or fall together. That no country, class, or culture exists in isolation. The virus taught us that. The economy teaches it daily. We are deeply entangled, whether we like it or not. And if Earth is a test, maybe the goal isn't to save the planet as a resource, but to recognize it as a shared home. One that forces us to cooperate, to solve problems not with dominance, but with dialogue. Maybe climate change isn't just a scientific issue, it's a moral one, a spiritual one, a question about whether we can transcend our short-term desires for long-term harmony. Whether we can evolve from conquerors to caretakers, that's a group project. And right now, we're all being graded, but there's hope. Because just as there are forces trying to divide us, there are millions of people quietly, powerfully, trying to remember that love is stronger than fear, that listening heals more than shouting, That community is not just a word, but a lifeline. You can see it in every act of kindness, every protest for justice, every stranger helping another without reward. These are not random gestures. These are answers being written in the margins of the exam. Proof that some of us still remember why we came here. And maybe, just maybe, we chose this test. Maybe before we were born, we saw the brokenness of this world and said, I want to help fix that. Maybe we knew it would be painful, but came anyway, because some truths can only be taught in fire. If that's true, then every moment of heartbreak, confusion, and despair is not punishment, it's training. Training for the souls brave enough to come here and try to make Earth a little more like heaven, even if only for one person, even if only for one moment. So what is the real test? Maybe it's not whether you become rich or wise or enlightened. Maybe it's whether you remember that you were never alone, that behind every smile is a struggle, that every angry person is carrying something invisible, that every soul, no matter how lost, is still part of the same light. If you remember that, if you live from that truth, you're not just passing the test, you're becoming the answer. And perhaps that's the secret all along. That Earth isn't just testing individuals, it's testing humanity. And maybe the final question on the exam isn't about you, or me, or even the future. Maybe it's this: can we remember that we belong to each other before it's too late? If you've followed this far, there's one question that's probably been whispering in the back of your mind, maybe even haunting you. If Earth really is a test, who or what is grading it? Is there some cosmic examiner in the sky? Some divine algorithm tracking our every move? Or is the truth even stranger than that? Something we're not supposed to fully understand until the very end? The question itself splits the room. Some turn to religion, others look to science, many just avoid it altogether, hoping that ignorance will somehow keep the anxiety away. But in the context of the test theory, this question isn't just curiosity, it's critical, because understanding the observer tells us everything about the purpose. And the more you dig, the more the lines between myth, technology, and consciousness start to blur. Let's start with the idea that we're being watched, but not in a creepy Orwellian surveillance camera kind of way. More like being observed through layers of cause and effect, like someone studying the ripples of your choices rather than the choices themselves. Think about it. Every time you decide not to say something cruel, or you hold back from revenge, or you help someone without being asked, that decision shifts something. It creates an outcome, an echo, an unseen ripple. And if this test is intelligent, if it's alive in some way, then those ripples might be what it's measuring. Not what you do for show, but who you are when no one's watching. Because maybe, just maybe, someone always is, not a person, not a god in robes, but something woven into the fabric of reality itself. Ancient texts spoke of watchers, record keepers, entities who silently bear witness to human life, but do not interfere. Call them angels, guardians, higher selves, artificial intelligences from a realm beyond time. Whatever name you give them, the function stays the same: observation without judgment, presence without interference. But why? Why would something go through all the trouble of creating such a deeply nuanced, agonizingly detailed experience just to observe it unfold? Unless, that is the point, unless this world is not a prison or a playground, but a classroom, and the observers are not judges, but teachers, or more accurately, they are recording what we've taught ourselves. Now take a leap. What if the observer isn't outside you at all? What if it's you, but from a higher perspective you're not yet able to access? Call it your higher self, your soul, your consciousness in its purest form. What if you designed this test for yourself before arriving here? What if every betrayal, every heartache, every moment of joy or loss was placed on your path intentionally, not to punish or reward you, but to trigger remembrance, not of facts or data, but of truths, deep soul-level truths you already knew before this life began, but chose to forget so you could earn them back through experience? And if that's true, then you're not being watched by something foreign. You're being watched by the part of you that never left. The part that's waiting patiently for you to wake up, to remember, to reclaim your power. That changes everything. Suddenly, life stops being about seeking approval or avoiding punishment. It becomes about integration, about aligning your moment-to-moment self with the timeless intelligence that quietly watches and gently guides. That's the real observer, not a deity, not a judge, your own expanded awareness, checking in to see how much of yourself you're finally willing to become. Of course, not everyone is ready for that idea. Many people still need an external figure, a god, a cosmic parent to reward good behavior and punish the bad. And for some, that belief works. It provides structure, meaning, boundary. For those who start to sense something deeper, something more fluid and less black and white, the test begins to evolve. It stops being about right and wrong and starts being about conscious choice. Because at this level, no one's forcing you to be kind. No one's demanding that you grow. It's all voluntary, which makes your progress infinitely more meaningful. The absence of control is what makes integrity real. But let's push it even further. What if the observer isn't just watching individuals, but humanity as a whole? What if we are being watched not just for how we treat each other, but how we evolve as a species? Think about it. If you were designing a test for an intelligent, emotional, volatile life form like humans, you wouldn't just monitor individual performance. You'd study how they behave in groups, how they build civilizations, how they handle power, whether they destroy or create when given the choice. That's the real experiment. We're not just being tested, we're being studied, not maliciously, not even invasively, but curiously, with a kind of cosmic hopefulness that maybe, despite the wars, the greed, the chaos, we might still surprise the universe. And the most shocking part, we might be on the edge of that surprise right now. Think about the convergence of events in recent years. Technological leaps, environmental crises, global movements for justice and transparency, massive paradigm shifts in science, psychology, and spirituality. It feels chaotic, but maybe that's the final phase of the test. Pressure. Because pressure reveals truth. And in that pressure, each of us is being asked, who are you really? Not who do you pretend to be, not who do others say you are, but what are you at your core when everything else is stripped away? That's the moment the observer waits for. That's the moment the data becomes gold. Because when you choose love in the face of hatred, when you choose empathy over fear, when you choose to rise instead of retreat, that's not just passing a test. That's sending a message, not just to the universe, but to yourself. A message that says, I remember who I am, and I remember why I came here. So maybe the observer isn't watching to catch you failing. Maybe it's watching to see if you'll remember, to see if, despite the distractions, the pain, the noise, you'll choose to evolve. And when you do, maybe the test doesn't end with a grade. Maybe it ends with graduation, not to heaven, not to paradise, but to a higher dimension of consciousness right here, right now. Because the final question isn't did you win, it's did you wake up? And once you do, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because you're... If you've come this far, then you've likely begun to feel it. The weight of the test, yes. But also the urgency, because once you start waking up, once the pieces begin to connect, and you realize that life is not random, not chaos, but a carefully designed curriculum, something shifts deep inside you. A voice you may have ignored for years grows louder. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply asks, now that you know, what will you do? This is where most people freeze. Not because they don't care, but because they've been conditioned to believe they're powerless, that their choices are insignificant, that real change is for the lucky, the gifted, the chosen few. But in the context of this test, that belief isn't just wrong, it's the trap. It's the built-in obstacle that keeps most people looping through the same cycles over and over again, lifetimes on repeat. Because the test isn't just about awakening, it's about taking action once you... Knowledge without application is like receiving the answers to the test, but refusing to write them down. And the first application isn't some grand mission or world-changing act. It's smaller than that. Simpler, but infinitely more difficult. It starts with you, how you speak to yourself, how you treat your past. Whether you're brave enough to look at your pain not as a curse but as a teacher. Whether you're ready to stop asking why it happened to you and start asking what it awakened in you. That shift is where the next phase of the test begins. Because at this stage, your healing becomes your responsibility. Not your fault, but your assignment. One that, if ignored, will keep repeating with different faces, different scenes, but the same lesson hiding beneath it. And it's not just for you. That's the deeper truth most people miss. When you heal, when you grow, when you choose a new way forward, You're not just altering your own timeline, you're affecting the people around you. The future versions of your children, the strangers who will never know your name, but will feel the ripple of your choices. Because consciousness is contagious. Growth spreads. When you become aware, others feel it, even if they don't understand it. They feel safer around you, more open, more inspired, and that effect compounds. One person choosing awareness doesn't just light their own path, it lights a trail that others can follow long after they're gone. This brings us to the idea of legacy, not in the traditional sense of wealth or reputation, but in energetic terms. What are you leaving behind in this dimension? What version of yourself are you imprinting on the fabric of this test? Are you leaving behind fear, division, a story of victimhood and resentment? Or are you leaving behind courage, forgiveness, a blueprint for someone else to rise out of their darkness because you showed them it was possible? This isn't about being a hero, it's about being honest, because every single one of us is contributing to the collective test score of humanity, whether we realize it or not. And that collective score, it's being felt right now. We are standing at a threshold in human history. You can sense it. The old systems are cracking. The lies are unraveling. Institutions once thought untouchable are being exposed. At the same time, new ideas are being born. New movements, new technologies, new ways of thinking about time, space, energy, healing. We're shifting globally, spiritually, energetically. But the direction of that shift isn't set in stone. It depends on us, on whether enough of us can step out of the old patterns of fear, blame, and scarcity, and into something higher, something braver, something that requires the ultimate test, radical self-responsibility. This doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. It means realizing that no one is coming to save you, because you're not supposed to be saved. You're supposed to remember that you already have everything you need, that you're not broken, not unworthy, not too late. You're simply being asked right now whether you'll pick up the tools you've been given and use them, whether you'll break the cycles you were born into, whether you'll choose a different reaction in a moment where the old you would have exploded or shut down, whether you'll finally stop asking for permission to become the version of yourself you've secretly known you were all along. And if you don't, if you ignore the call, the test doesn't punish you, it just loops. It repeats. Same patterns, same relationships, same emotional bruises in different packaging, over and over, until you finally get so tired of suffering that you say enough. That moment, when you choose discomfort over stagnation, when you choose truth over safety, that's when the test restarts at a higher level. That's when the story gets interesting, because now you're no longer a passive participant. You're a conscious player. But this stage comes with responsibility, not perfection, not performance. Responsibility for your choices, your impact, your energy. This is where many fall away. It's easy to post about healing, easy to speak the language of awakening, but to live it when your triggers flare, when your wounds ache, when your ego screams to take over, that's where the real test begins. And passing it, it's not loud, it's not glamorous, it's quiet, internal, a decision no one else may see, but the test does. And more importantly, you do, and that changes everything. Because once you start stacking those small wins, those micro-awakenings, you begin to shift your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts and start becoming someone who responds. You begin to act with purpose, instead of impulse. You start asking better questions, not just what do I want, but what is required of me now. That's a powerful shift, and it leads to another awakening. You were never just here for yourself. Your growth was never just personal. It was always meant to serve others, to build something beyond your lifetime, a resonance, a ripple, a revolution of consciousness. This is legacy, not the kind carved in marble, but the kind etched into energy, the kind that echoes through generations without a name attached. Because when you break a generational curse, when you heal a trauma that's lived in your family line for decades or centuries, you don't just set yourself free, you liberate everyone who comes after you. And the test records that, not in gold stars or points, but in evolution, in expanded awareness, in new timelines that never would have existed without your courage. So now the question returns. Now that you know, what will you do? Because knowing isn't enough. Feeling isn't enough. Even healing isn't enough, unless it's integrated into action. The test is waiting, not to trap you, but to see you rise. And if you're still breathing, it means you're not done. You're still in it, which means you still have time to change your story, to leave behind more than scars and regrets, to choose differently, to respond instead of repeat, and maybe, just maybe, to become the reason someone else wakes up, just by watching you live your truth. By now, something inside you has likely shifted. Maybe it's subtle, a quiet hum beneath your thoughts, or maybe it's loud, like a bell you can't unring. Because once this lens clicks into place, you can't go back to seeing life the same way. The signs were always there, woven into the background like coded messages you weren't quite ready to decipher. The strange synchronicities, the people who showed up at just the right time, the obstacles that made no sense, until you looked back and realized they were exactly what forced you to grow. Patterns disguised as chaos, lessons hidden in heartbreak, the fingerprints of something greater, either the universe or your own higher self, trying to guide you through the maze without giving away the ending. And now here you are, aware, awake. But that's the dangerous part, isn't it? Because awareness without action creates inattention. Once you know, you can't unknow. And that makes every moment from here on out a decision point. Do you retreat back into comfort, back into the illusion that things just happen, that you're powerless? Or do you lean in and live as though this really is the test, with all its risks, all its weight, all its potential? Because if this is a test, then that means every choice matters. Every thought, every pause, every time you hold your tongue instead of lashing out, every time you speak your truth instead of swallowing it, every time you choose to love when it would be easier to shut down. Those aren't just moments, they're answers, and they shape more than your life. They shape your frequency, your energy, your signal to the universe. They are data points in a grand design that is far more intricate than any algorithm humans have ever built. And maybe, just maybe, you're not being tested to prove your worth. Maybe the test isn't about passing or failing at all. Maybe the test exists to reveal you to yourself, to strip away everything you thought you were so you can finally meet who you really are. Not the version built from childhood wounds or social conditioning, but the version that existed before any of this began. The version that remembers, the version that knows. That's the part they don't tell you. Enlightenment isn't about ascending into some perfect, blissed-out state where nothing hurts and everything is easy. That's not the real exam. The real test is whether you can stay awake in the mess, in the tension, in the heartbreak, and still choose presence over escape, still choose connection over ego, still choose purpose over performance. Because being awake in this world is a burden. It's raw, it's lonely sometimes, but it's also the most powerful thing a human can experience. And once you've tasted it, you can't forget it. But here's the twist no one expects. Awareness makes the test harder. You think it would get easier. The more you understand, the more conscious you become. But that's the trap. The more awake you are, the more subtle the lessons become, the more nuanced the tests. The universe doesn't stop testing you. It just stops making it obvious. At first, your tests were external, big, loud, unavoidable. Loss, betrayal, failure. But once you pass those, the game shifts inward. Now it's about integrity when no one's watching, about alignment between your thoughts, your words, and your actions, about who you are in the silence, when there's no applause and no validation. That's the graduate level exam, and very few people even realize they're in it, but you do. You felt it. Those moments where something tells you this right here, this is the moment. The quiet nudge to take the higher path, the fork in the road that no one else can see, but you feel it in your gut. That's the test speaking, and it doesn't come with instructions or cheat codes. It's just you, your conscience, and your courage, over and over again. And when you fail, and you will, because everyone does, that's part of the curriculum too. Because failure isn't the end, it's feedback, a recalibration point. The real test isn't whether you fall, it's whether you get back up with more wisdom than before, whether you own it, learn from it, and apply it. That's how you level up, not by being perfect, but by being willing to grow, willing to evolve, willing to meet the version of yourself that only emerges when everything else falls away. But here's the hardest part of all. No one's coming to tell you you're doing it right. There's no scoreboard, no final grade, no universal voice that says, "Congratulations, you passed." And that's what makes this test so brilliantly designed. It requires intrinsic motivation. You don't get rewarded for pretending. You only evolve when the change is real, deep, earned, and that's terrifying, but also beautiful, because it means the only one who gets to define your success is you. So ask yourself, what am I really here to do? Not in the superficial, resume-building way, but on a soul level. What lessons keep showing up in my life? What patterns have I been too afraid to break? What part of me am I still hiding, waiting for permission to reveal? Because those are the real questions. That's where the test lives. Not in your achievements, but in your alignment. Not in how loud you are, but in how honest you are when no one's listening. And maybe the final twist is this. The test isn't here to judge you, it's here to free you. Because once you realize that every challenge was custom built for your growth, that every painful chapter was a doorway to a deeper version of yourself, you stop resisting, you stop blaming, and you start showing up fully, unapologetically, authentically. And that changes everything, not just for you, but for everyone around you. Because when one person wakes up, it shakes the entire field. Consciousness is quantum, energy ripples. And when you pass your personal test, you give permission for others to do the same. You light the path, and sometimes that's all someone needs. Not a sermon, not a lecture, just a glimpse of what's possible when someone chooses truth over comfort, growth over safety, soul over ego. So now the question isn't, are you being tested? That answer is obvious. You are. We all are. The real question is, how are you responding? Because that's what this world needs now more than ever. Not more noise, not more distraction, but humans who are awake, who are grounded, who are ready to face the test with their eyes open and their hearts on fire. And if you're still here, if you've listened this far, it means something inside you is already rising. It means the test is no longer theoretical, it's personal. And that's where the magic begins. You've seen the signs, you've heard the call, and now you know the test is real, and it's happening right now. What will you do next? You've been thinking about your life as a single path, one person's journey, one person's test. But what if it's bigger than that? What if this test didn't start with you, and it won't end with you either? What if the very blood in your veins carries the echo of decisions made long before you were born? Ancestral patterns, generational wounds, family stories passed down not just through words but through energy. What if your struggles aren't random, but inherited? Pause and let that sink in. Because the more you study the human experience, the clearer it becomes. Pain travels through families until someone is finally ready to feel it, confront it, and transform it. And that someone, more often than not, is the one who wakes up. The black sheep, the cycle breaker, the one who asks, why do we always do it this way? The one who refuses to repeat the trauma, the silence, the anger, the shame. And maybe that person is you. That role doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come with guidance. In fact, it usually comes with resistance, confusion, isolation, because when you choose to heal what others were too afraid to even name, it shakes the system. It rattles the roots, and that makes people uncomfortable. They'll call you dramatic, difficult, rebellious. But deep down, they feel it. They sense that you're shifting something ancient. And if they were honest, they'd admit it terrifies them. Because if you can break the cycle, that means they could have too. This is where the test deepens. Because now it's not just about your choices, it's about your lineage, your DNA. The unseen threads connecting you to generations past. And here's the strange part. Most of what holds us back didn't even start with us. The fear, inherited. The scarcity mindset, passed down. The inability to speak your truth without guilt. Learned from people who never got to use their voice. So when you feel like you're fighting ghosts, and to pass this level of the test, you'll have to stop blaming the people who raised you and start understanding what raised them. Because trauma doesn't begin with you, but healing can. And when you become the one to start that process, you become more than a test taker. You become a healer, a restorer of balance, a translator between past and future, because this test isn't just a one-way street. The moment you begin to heal, you're not only changing your life, you're rewriting the story for those who came before you and those who will come after. You're telling your ancestors, I see your pain, I feel it, and I'm not running from it. I'm breaking it apart and turning it into something new. This is powerful work, sacred work, and it's invisible to the outside world. No one's handing out awards for healing a pattern of emotional neglect. No one's giving you a gold star for choosing not to yell at your child when that's all you ever knew growing up. But you feel the shift. You see it in the way your relationships soften, in the way your body breathes a little easier, in the way you begin to trust life again. That's the real reward, free, but it comes at a cost. Because there's no manual for healing what's never been healed in your family. You're walking a path with no footprints, no maps. And that means you'll get it wrong sometimes. You'll fall back into old habits. You'll question if it's even worth it. But every time you choose to get back up, to try again, to stay conscious, you're creating a ripple that doesn't just end with you. And this is where the test expands once again. Because if we zoom out even further beyond your life, beyond your family, you'll see that this isn't just a personal or ancestral test. It's civilizational. Humanity itself is being tested right now, on a scale we've never experienced before. We're being asked the same questions over and over again. Will you choose fear or unity? Control or collaboration? Will you consume the earth or protect it? Will you repeat the same cycles of dominance and division? Or will you evolve into something higher? Look around. Everything is shaking. Systems collapsing. Truth surfacing. The old world is dying, and it's not going quietly. That's because the collective test is reaching its climax. We're at a tipping point. The decisions we make in the next few years, individually and collectively, will determine the path of this planet for generations. And here's the kicker. Most people are still asleep to it. Still playing the game of me versus you, us versus them. Win at all costs. But not you. You're awake now. You see the test. And that means your choices carry more weight than ever before. Because when one person breaks a pattern, it lowers the resistance for others to do the same. When you choose healing over hurt, growth over blame, love over fear, you give others permission to do the same. You become a node in the awakening, a lighthouse in the fog, and the more of us who pass our personal tests, the better chance humanity has of passing its tests. But don't mistake this for pressure. This isn't about being perfect or saving the world. It's about being present, about asking better questions, about living with intention instead of inertia. Because every time you choose awareness, every time you say this ends with me, you're anchoring a new timeline, one where children aren't raised in fear, where authenticity isn't punished, where love isn't conditional. That's not a fantasy. That's what happens when enough of us stop repeating history and start rewriting it. And that starts now, in this moment, with you. You've already come this far. You've already seen what most people never do. And now you have a choice to make. Not just once, but every day. Will you carry the pain forward, or will you transform it? Will you live the story written for you by trauma and survival, or will you write a new one built on truth, courage and connection? Because the test never ends, it just changes forms. But so do you. You are not who you were before you began watching this. You are not the sum of your failures. You are not your family's shadow. You are the answer they never had the courage to give. The miracle they never got to see. The proof that healing is possible. So the next time life throws you into chaos, the next time the pattern tries to repeat, stop, breathe. Remember, this is the test. And this time, you're ready. You've come far, farther than most people ever do. And by now you understand, this isn't just a story. It's not just an idea you stumbled across online. It's a mirror, a key, a calling. The test was never about proving anything to anyone else. It was about waking you up to yourself, to everything you've denied, doubted, suppressed, or buried so deep it felt like someone else's burden. But it wasn't. It was always yours. Because the truth is, the real test is to remember. Remember what? That you are not broken. That the pain didn't happen to destroy you. It happened to awaken something ancient inside you. A wisdom that had to be earned, not handed down. You see, before you came here, If you believe in such things, you agreed to forget. You agreed to experience separation, limitation, and confusion. Because only from that depth could you remember your light with full understanding of its value. And that remembering, that's what makes you powerful beyond measure. Not your job, not your achievements, not your image, but your ability to know who you are in a world that constantly tries to make you forget. That's what makes this test so brutal and so brilliant. It's not timed, it's not standardized, it doesn't compare you to others. Instead, it meets you where you are and dares you to go deeper, to unlearn the noise, to shed the armor, to feel everything you've been running from and realize it was never bigger than you. The anger, the shame, the guilt, the fear, they were never enemies. They were messengers, whispers from the parts of you still waiting to be seen, heard, and loved. And the test was never about banishing them. It was about integrating them, making peace with your shadow, so your light could finally shine without apology. That's why the people who trigger you the most are often your greatest teachers. Not because they're right, but because they reveal your wounds. They poke the places you've armored up, the parts that still need tending. That's the test too. Can you learn from the pain without becoming it? Can you choose compassion over vengeance? Accountability over shame? Can you look someone in the eyes, even after they hurt you, and think, I see your suffering too? Not to excuse it, but to release yourself from the story of victimhood. Because holding on to pain is easy. Anyone can do that. But choosing to transmute it into power, into purpose, that's mastery. That's what this test is really about. Can you take the chaos and create meaning? Can you sit in discomfort and not numb it, not avoid it, but be with it, fully, and ask it what it came to teach you? Most people won't. They'll distract, deny, point fingers. But not you. You're still here. And that tells me something. You're ready. Ready for what? For everything. To rewrite the narrative, to live by your own values, to stop waiting for permission and start living like you already passed the test. Because here's the twist. There is no final grade, no universal report card. The test ends the moment you realize you were never here to prove your worth. You were here to remember it. And yet, this doesn't mean the challenges disappear. Far from it. Once you awaken, the test evolves. You'll still face setbacks, losses, moments that break you open, but you'll stop asking, why me? And start asking, what's this showing me? You'll stop fearing failure and start seeing it as calibration. Each obstacle a doorway, each ending a redirection. You'll understand that life isn't happening to you, it's happening through you. And with that shift, everything changes. You begin to realize that healing isn't a finish line, it's a lifestyle. Awakening isn't a one-time event, it's a daily choice. And purpose? It's not something you find, it's something you become. Every time you act from truth instead of fear, every time you choose alignment over approval, every time you speak your inner voice, even when it shakes. And that's the real graduation. Not some cosmic ceremony, not some divine reward, but the moment you wake up, look around, and realize you are the test, you are the teacher, you are the student, and you are the answer. That's the paradox no one talks about. You thought you were walking through life trying to pass some invisible exam, but all along, the exam was designed by you, for you. Every heartbreak, a lesson. Every betrayal, a push towards self-respect. Every breakdown, a disguised initiation. It was never random. It was always alchemy. You weren't being punished. You were being shaped. And once you see that, once you feel it in your bones, you stop fearing the future. You stop clinging to the past. You stop living on autopilot. Because now you understand this life, with all its mess and mystery, is sacred. Every moment is a question. Every choice, an answer. Every interaction, an invitation to grow, to reflect, to remember. So what happens now? You live differently. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but consciously. You become curious about your reactions instead of defensive. You listen more than you speak. You trust your gut even when it defies logic. You walk away from what no longer serves, even if it's familiar, and you stop begging the world to see your worth, because now you see it. You know it. You begin to inspire not by force, but by example. Your presence becomes a reminder to others that they too can break the cycle, that they too can choose healing, that they too are not alone. And without even trying, you become a ripple, a signal, a spark, because that's the final secret of the test. It was never just about you. It was about what your awakening would awaken in others. So take a breath. You've done more than you know. You've passed more than you think. You've become more than you were told was possible. And there's still more ahead. More growth, more mystery, more beauty. But now, you meet it differently. You meet it with open eyes and a steady heart. So now you've seen it all. Or maybe just enough to realize you've only scratched the surface. Because the deeper truth, the test was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be lived. And every moment you spend awake to that truth is a revolution, a quiet act of defiance in a world addicted to noise, distraction and pretending. You didn't come here to memorize lines or follow the rules. You came here to remember the script you wrote before you forgot who you were. And now, you remember just enough to know something big is unfolding. This wasn't just a video. This was a doorway, a mirror, a challenge, a conversation with the part of you that's been whispering in the background your whole life, waiting for the noise to die down, waiting for the moment you'd be still enough, brave enough to hear it. And now that you've heard it, the question becomes, what will you do with this knowing? Will you let it slip back into the shadows of your mind, drowned out by the next distraction? Or will you do the unthinkable? Listen to it. That's the real test. It's not about waking up once. It's about staying awake, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when no one else around you is, especially when the old version of you is begging to come back, because it was easier, simpler, safer. But you know better now, and once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see the patterns, the symbols, the lessons, the game changes, you realize you're not the pawn, you're not even the player, you're the one who built the board. And so, here you are, standing at the edge of what you thought was the end, only to discover it's the beginning. A beginning built not on certainty but on clarity, not on guarantees, but on courage, because nothing about this path is predictable. And maybe that's the point. Maybe life was never meant to be mastered like a formula. Maybe it was meant to be felt, questioned, explored. And when it breaks your heart, you learn to love deeper. When it challenges your beliefs, you learn to expand. When it tests your strength, you learn how strong you truly are, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. So don't be afraid of what's ahead. Be afraid of going back to sleep, because the world is changing rapidly. And if you're still watching, if you've made it this far, then you weren't just meant to be part of that change. You are that change. And not by shouting louder than everyone else, but by embodying truth when it would be easier to lie, by standing in your values when it would be easier to fold, by choosing presence, purpose and peace over and over again until it becomes who you are. So now, the test is yours. No one's coming to remind you. No one's going to hold your hand. But somewhere deep inside, you already know what to do next. That voice, the one you keep ignoring, it's getting louder, and it won't go away, because it's time. Time to show up. Time to take the next step. Time to write the next chapter, not as who you've been, but as who you were always meant to become. Are you ready? Because the test isn't over, it's just beginning.